and we're going to get started for the evening. Welcome to our third Thursday OSE Do Your Part speaker series and workshop. We have a fabulous presentation tonight from the ISC about kids, sticks and carrots and compact compliance. And I know everyone is pretty curious about what's happening with that, especially given that the Rio seems to be going dry quite quickly in Albuquerque in the last week. So we're really excited to get started. We have just a quick introduction, a land acknowledgement, and then I will turn over introductions to Norm. So thank you for joining us tonight. The Water Advocates' main activism areas are located on the traditional homelands of their southern Tiwa, pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, Santa Felipe, Santa Ana, Sandia, and Isleta, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache. Since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. So I'm going to turn it over to Norm to introduce Nat and Tanya.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I wanted to acknowledge a couple of special guests. We have one reporter from the national press, I see, and one candidate for the State House of Representatives in an open seat. So very much appreciate your interest in water, and thank you for joining us tonight. I am very grateful that Nat Chakeres, the General Counsel for the State Engineer, accepted my invitation some time ago to make this presentation. We postponed it because he wasn't quite ready, but I think the time is right. And I look forward to hearing some very interesting and I think different things tonight. And New Mexico is very fortunate to have Tanya Trujillo back in the state. Tanya is an incredible lawyer and leader in water. She has a track record to the state in private practice and as a Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Water and Science. And she's back in New Mexico with the title Deputy State Engineer. Nat and Tanya, if you'd like to say a few other things about yourself or get started, it's the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Norma. I can kick it off for us. And hello, everybody. Thank you for having us this evening. Again, my name is Tanya Trujillo. I'm the Deputy State Engineer here in New Mexico, and I'm also a Water Policy Advisor to the Governor. I am quickly going to turn it over to Nat, our General Counsel, for this presentation, and really appreciate the effort that he's put into pulling things together. And we look forward to the discussion of these important issues. I think to frame the context, as everyone knows, we're doing a lot of things at all times, up and down the river and throughout the state of New Mexico on water management, and really appreciate the strong team that we have here at the State Engineer Office and the Interstate Stream Commission to help us manage the water on a daily basis. So thanks a lot, and quickly just turn it over to Nat.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Norm. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'm Nat Chakeres. I'm the General Counsel to the New Mexico State Engineer. I've been in this position for 2.5 years. I've been with the Office of the State Engineer for almost 6 years in total. Prior to that time, I worked some in private practice. I also worked for about 6 years for the United States Department of Justice, doing environmental enforcement, working on some large pollution cases nationwide. And before that, I was at UNM Law School. I'm a native of Santa Fe, and I'm happy to be doing exactly the job that I was hoping to do when I decided to go to law school. It's a real honor to be serving the state. We have a lot of challenges, and we're happy to talk tonight about what we envision as the best chance for New Mexico to smoothly meet its future water challenges, particularly in the Middle Rio Grande. I have a presentation that's titled tonight, The Carrots and Sticks for Achieving Interstate Compact Compliance. And I am going to be focusing on the Rio Grande Compact, with particular focus on the obligations of the of New Mexico in the Middle Rio Grande. We are currently in litigation as to New Mexico's obligations in the Lower Rio Grande. I'm happy to talk about those issues too, if folks want to bring that up in question and answer time. But the Middle Rio Grande is we're in a place, I hope, where we want to get New Mexico into a safe compact compliance position without litigation. And that's sort of the vision I'm going to be trying to lay out here today. We'll see what happens, but that's really where our focus is going to be. And so I just wanted to start, if you want to go to slide 2, with just some background on our office. This isn't sort of a legal seminar, so I'm not going to dwell on these points. As I'm sure everybody is aware, the state engineer has general supervision over the waters of the state, and that includes ensuring that water use is done in accordance with state law. The Interstate Stream Commission is a independent commission appointed by the governor, but is administratively attached to the office of the state engineer, and we work in conjunction. The Interstate Stream Commission is charged with protecting the waters of the state, including through interstate compacts. So the Interstate Stream Commission provides the expertise on compact accounting, compact compliance, and their staff works together with the Office of the State Engineer with respect to any actions the state needs to take in order to comply with its interstate compacts. If we want to go to slide 3, just some really basic background principles. Again, I think everybody is aware of in terms of water law in New Mexico. It is a prior appropriation state. And what does that mean? It means there's 2 overarching principles. Beneficial use is the basis, the measure, and the limit of a water right in New Mexico. Not whether you own land proximate to water, it's whether you have, in accordance with state law, begun using water at the right time and followed the right procedures. And only the amount of water that you've been using can be protected as your water right. The other major principle of prior appropriation is that water rights must be administered in priority. That means the senior user has the, quote, better right. That means if we were doing strict priority administration, if there's not enough water to serve a senior user, they can entirely cut off users junior to them before the senior has to curtail at all. The next couple principles I just wanted to put on the table, so we're all on the same page. For the past 20 years, the law has been established in New Mexico that the state engineer has the authority to administer water rights by priority, including even in the absence of an adjudication decree. And that's relevant in the Middle Rio Grande, where while we may get into this, we are planning to adjudicate in the Middle Rio Grande. That's something that folks have been wondering if it would ever happen. But in order to resolve the claims of the 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos, the United States Department of Justice requires that there be an adjudication decree. And so the state of New Mexico would, if those negotiations move forward with the federal appointment of a negotiation team, eventually commit to commencing an adjudication. But even in the absence of an adjudication, the state engineer may administer water rights on the basis of either water declarations or other information at the state engineer's disposal as to the priority of water rights. The last principle I wanted to put out there, just so we all have a common understanding at the beginning, is that even if there's enough water in the river and somebody is the senior user in a system, i.e. they're in priority, the state engineer may still curtail those senior users in order to ensure compliance with an interstate compact. That principle was established back in the 1930s in a compact case involving New Mexico. It was between New Mexico and the state of Colorado on the La Plata River in the San Juan drainage. And it was an important win for water users in New Mexico. It ensured that the upstream state, Colorado, could curtail its users in order to ensure that New Mexico got its compact apportionment. And that's been probably the most important compact law case in the Supreme Court's ever decided. have been other very big Supreme Court cases on compacts, but that's the one that sort of laid out the general principle. So that's the legal background we're in. I wanted to talk a little bit about the hydrologic background that we're in. And if we just advance to slide 4, the Interstate Stream Commission, since Governor Juan Grisham came into office, has been really proactive in trying to help New Mexico plan for its water future. The first step was defining what our water future is going to look like. And in conjunction with the New Mexico Bureau of Geology at New Mexico Tech, the Interstate Stream Commission did a peer-reviewed scientific study, which has been discussed in this program before. We sometimes call it a leap ahead analysis about what water is going to look like with climate change over the course of the next 50 years. And so I just have on that slide, that's available to the public. I really encourage people to look at that report. It's a really good resource. The next resource I wanted to put out there is a really underutilized resource. It's not perfect. It's got a lot of limitations. Norm has talked with us about the limitations of this report a number of times in the past, but it's not a bad place to look. If you just want a rough picture of how much water is being used by what sectors and what parts of the state, we actually compile that, and we update it on a 5-year basis. Sometimes we are a little late in getting those updates done, but it is a water use by category report in New Mexico. And that gives you, again, pretty high degree of granularity, but a pretty good idea of how much water use is out there in various parts of the state. When we're getting into the place where we're going to administer, we're going to have a much finer grained understanding of how much water is being used and what the hydrologic connection between those users are. But for folks in the public, if you want to have an idea, where's our water going? This is a good resource. It's the water use by categories report. It's also available on our website. Then if we go to slide 5, this is just sort of out of order, but I'm going to do a couple of plugs in this program. We are right now engaged in an effort to revitalize our regional water planning, which will very much be done hand in hand with the administration efforts that I'm going to be detailing here. And right now we are in a public outreach setting where we're getting public input on scoping and big picture issues related to our regional water planning efforts. And so we have a website for that, mainstreamnm.org. If you've not been there, please visit the website. You can go and give feedback remotely. There's also a series of open houses that we've been holding, and the schedule for those is also on the website where people can provide feedback in person. But we really want to hear from the public about really some threshold questions about setting up the regional planning process the right way to ensure that we have useful, actionable plans coming out as a result of the process. So plugs aside, I want to get back to sort of a common understanding of where we are in New Mexico in terms of our water, with a focus in the Middle Rio Grande. If we go to slide 6, just a high level understanding. Again, I think folks, this is not news to people in this broadcast. Despite uncertainty about how fast humans are going to be able to reduce their carbon emissions, we, across a number of simulations and modeling runs, see a pretty good idea that New Mexico is going to see less snowpack in our high mountains, and it's going to be a progressively worse problem as things go in the decades to come. There's also likely to be more violent rainstorms at lower elevations, and even given levels of precipitation, even when those stay steady in the aggregate, we're going to be drier because there's going to be more evapotranspiration from our plants, as well as evaporation from our soils because of higher air temperatures. That's just basic physics. So we are facing less water in the future, regardless of what happens, in terms of the pace of people getting around carbon emissions. And we need to prepare for that now. The next slide, slide 7, is just a national map of what's going to be happening in terms of water. The brown areas are places that are going to be seeing less water with climate change. The blue areas are areas that are going to be seeing more precipitation with climate change. And we're in the brown zone, so we're going to get less precipitation. just as an aside, some of the scientists who put these things together tell me we actually should think of ourselves as a bit lucky to be on the brown side rather than the blue side. We can prepare if we work right now together to deal with less water. It's a lot harder to deal with violent catastrophic flooding in the same way you can deal with drought. And that's what the blue means. It's a nice soft hue on this map, but really what blue means is danger from flooding. We have our own flooding risks in New Mexico, and we'll continue to have them, but nothing like, say, South Florida or Texas coast or something where it's just, you know, a real challenge in the opposite direction on water. So while the picture is dire in terms of how much water we're going to have, and we're going to go into some detail on that, it's not something we should just throw up our hands and give up on. If we work together, we actually do have a path where we can, you know, maintain our way of life and maintain our state and maintain our environmental habitat using less water, but still able to inhabit New Mexico. And that's really what we're trying to get to with folks. So specifically, how much less water are we going to have? If we go to slide 8, there's a graph with some sort of spaghetti lines, and those represent different carbon emission scenarios, but they all, like I said, are in agreement that New Mexico in the aggregate is going to have less flow in our streams as a result of climate change. So this is specifically modeling flows in the Rio Grande forward, as well as looking at flows in the Rio Grande from the period 1950 to the present. And you see right there, we already have been seeing declines in flows in the Rio Grande from 1950 to the present. We're going to see further declines. And the average is likely to be around 5% per year of reduced stream flows. I'm sorry, 5% per decade. That would be dire if it was 5% per year. 5% per decade of reduced stream flows. So you sometimes hear, you know, 50 years from now, we're going to have 25% less water in our streams. That's where that number is coming from. It also means that 60 years from now, we're going to have 30% less water. I mean, unless, you know, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with our carbon emissions. We're going to continue to have less water as a result of climate change. So, you know, that's one action point that we have. You know, climate change is going to hit New Mexico pretty hard. But what we're doing is we're trying to position ourselves to meet that challenge. So if we're going to be having 25% less water in 50 years, say, in our streams available for use, all that water, and I'll get to that in a moment, is legally spoken for. It's either in use right now, or it's being delivered for use downstream pursuant to our interstate compacts. So there's no choice. People who have a legal entitlement to use water are going to have to use less water. That is a just given fact that we have to deal with. The only formal tool that we at the Office of the State Engineer have to do that is priority administration. Priority administration, like I said before, is it's a pretty harsh tool, especially across a wide variety of users, including municipal uses and other types of uses. It means that the senior-most user gets everything, doesn't have to cut back in the slightest, and then the junior users get cut off in order of seniority until there's enough water to satisfy the remaining users. That system was developed in the mid-19th century in mining camps in the mining rushes in Nevada and California. It made sense there probably to have a system where the first in time was first in right, and they got, you know, all the water, and it wasn't going to be diluted, because if somebody was only getting a portion of the water, they weren't going to be able to operate their mining operations. It's not a great way, I'll just say, to administer, say, between municipal and agricultural and pueblo and environmental uses. And we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. The senior-most users in the Middle Rio Grande are pueblos. Under any of our scenarios, I think that the pueblos, there'll be water to satisfy senior pueblo needs that have been, you know, firmly established. But they're actually not a huge majority of the water use in the Middle Rio Grande. In the remaining uses, we have agricultural uses in the Middle Rio Grande that are senior to municipal uses. And so theoretically, you could have some farmers cut off some municipalities, but the idea of municipalities completely going dry and we have over 1 million people without drinking water is a pretty grotesque result. And it's not something that across the West has ever sort of really been allowed to come to pass. To make matters more muddled, municipalities have purchased some of those senior irrigation rights, and so they'd be protected in some regard there. And some of them have imported water from outside the Rio Grande Basin entirely. That's the San Juan Chama project. The San Juan Chama project brings water from the Colorado River Basin across the Continental Divide into the Rio Grande Basin. And if we're administering by priority in New Mexico, that water would not be subject to a priority call on the Rio Grande. And there's a little bit of that water for irrigation uses in New Mexico, but primarily most of that water would be going to municipal uses. But there's not enough of that water to come even close to satisfying current needs. And that is also a highly dependent source on hydrologic supply. So the total amount that New Mexico could get in a great hydrologic year from the San Juan Chama project is a little over 96,000 acre feet per year. But there have been many years where we're getting 40, 50, 60,000 acre feet of water from there. And that's, again, nowhere near enough water to satisfy all existing demand in the Middle Rio Grande. And that water is not sort of compact water. So we actually would not be able to rely on that water to meet compact obligations to Elephant Butte. And I'm actually going to skip ahead in the slides a little bit to give some background on the Rio Grande Compact before we come back to our solutions. If we could go ahead, and it would be slide 10. I have here just a map. Of course, everybody knows New Mexico, but it's a map of the Rio Grande Compact. And we have shading based on different zones of the Rio Grande Basin because they're governed by different rules under the Rio Grande Compact. Water flows only one way with gravity. The upper basin, upstream users are treated fundamentally differently than downstream users in interstate compacts. So there's no way getting around the fact that upstream users have a different type of obligation than downstream users. So Colorado has an obligation in the San Luis Valley to deliver a certain quantity of water every year to the New Mexico state line. And they've undergone a number of very difficult efforts to try to ensure that they're complying with that. And their challenges continue, but they're actually a helpful example because I do think that Colorado has mustered a lot of political will to meet its compact obligations. Then there's the Upper Rio Grande in New Mexico, and that is the part of New Mexico above ODE gauge. That part of New Mexico does not have a specific obligation to deliver a set quantity of water, but it does have an obligation to not increase its depletions above what its depletions were in 1929. So that's one particular type of restriction, and it's a big restriction. It's a real restriction in the Upper Rio Grande. The ODE gauge is located right on the road between Nambe and Los Alamos, right when you cross the Rio Grande. And it's right before the Rio Grande goes into sort of its canyons by White Rock, New Mexico, and eventually emerging in Cochiti. So there's no water use in those canyons. There's water use in the Espanola Valley above that gauge. And then, of course, Cochiti below, there's water use. So it's a real break between the upper part of the Rio Grande and the lower part of the Rio Grande. It made a lot of sense to put an index gauge there. And so the Middle Rio Grande is from the ODE gauge down to Elephant Butte. And Elephant Butte isn't just one particular point in the universe. It's kind of a complex of gauges and dams and things. But for our purposes here, we're going to say Elephant Butte is the lower boundary of the Middle Rio Grande. And there's a very specific obligation for New Mexico in terms of delivery of water to Elephant Butte. And it's an equation that is calculated based on the amount of water that passes the ODE gauge some proportion of that water must be delivered to Elephant Butte. And it doesn't matter where that water comes from. If it's great rainfall, wonderful. If it's, some curtailing of some users, it doesn't matter. That water just needs to get to Elephant Butte. And then in the Lower Rio Grande, the compact is surprisingly silent as to how the water gets distributed. And that's why we've been in litigation with Texas for over a decade on what that means. If we could just go to slide 11, there's just a little bit more detail about some of the main spots there on the map of the Rio Grande Compact. And then I am going to go ahead to, I believe it's the subsequent slide titled Rio Grande Compact Cumulative Departures. So the Rio Grande Compact requires New Mexico in that middle Rio Grande, and that's what I'm focusing on. In that middle Rio Grande, it prohibits New Mexico from ever exceeding 200,000 acre-feet of debit in its compact delivery. So there's some recognition that there's noise in the system, that the hydrology is going to require, is going to vary by tens of thousands of acre-feet per year in a way that New Mexico shouldn't be expected to meet its delivery obligation on the nose every year. So there's some flexibility there, but we can never go below 200,000 acre-feet. And if you look at this graph, this is New Mexico's compact compliance from the beginning of the compact to the present. And if you look back in the 1950s, we actually fell into an enormous hole on the compact. There was litigation, and that didn't result in a Supreme Court decree, but it was a serious issue. And New Mexico did a few things then that got us out of the hole. We also had some benefit of rains, but some of those things are instructive to what we do today. Some of the things are things we probably wouldn't do today. But we took some pretty strong measures in the 1950s to get out of that hole. And what we want to do today, and then I'll move forward to today. So in the 50s, we had a big hole. We climbed out of it by the end of the 60s. In the 80s, we started having some pretty nice monsoon years. And in the 80s and 90s, we started running up some credits. And the Elephant Butte Dam spilled. That means there was so much water in the system that they couldn't store anymore in Elephant Butte both in the mid 80s and then I believe in the mid 90s as well. And so, or it was a hypothetical spill in the mid 90s, which I'm not going to go into the details there of what that means, but it basically resets the accounting. So whenever the accounting goes back to zero, that's kind of what was happening there. That's great news for the system. That means there's enough water for everybody in New Mexico to be using what they need to use, and for delivery into Elephant Butte for users in Lower New Mexico, in Lower Rio Grande, New Mexico, and Texas. And then I want to go into early 2000s. We started having drought. The late 2000s into the 2010s, we had continued to have drought, but we still managed to stay above our cumulative compact obligation. And then starting in about 2018, we've fallen, and we've fallen pretty rapidly, and in a way that's causing us concern. So between around 2018 and now, we've fallen about 121,000 acre-feet in debit on the Rio Grande Compact. Again, there's no immediate consequences in terms of compact violation. There are some consequences for users to be able to store water when we're in any kind of debit. I'm not going to talk about that today, but what I'm talking about is really avoiding getting to the red line. We're more than halfway to that red line in about a 5-6 year period, which is pretty short by the time frame of these long scales. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out there and communicate with the major water users about what we need to do to arrest that drop. The next slide, the annual Rio Grande Compact deliveries, is really a sort of a similar sort of slide, but it just, instead of showing our annual departure, it's showing every year's our cumulative departure. It's showing every year our annual departure. And what this shows is that there's years, I mean, they're not very often, but there's years where we've gone 100,000 acre feet in debit in a single year. More likely, our debits are debit deliveries are less than 50,000 acre feet, but that still shouldn't give us a whole lot of comfort because, 2 years of 50,000 acre foot debit delivery, and we're past that 200,000 acre foot red line. That's not good. And so, again, we're trying to be proactive here. The next slide, the Rio Grande Compact allocation chart. I just wanted to provide as a graphical illustration of how the Middle Rio Grande's obligations work. So on the vertical axis, we have the annual compact allocations, and on the horizontal axis, we have annual inflows at ODOE, so that sort of index flow up at ODOE. And as the horizontal axis gets greater, you'll see our New Mexico delivery obligation to Elephant Butte Reservoir increases linearly. But our amount that the total amount of annual compact allocation, that's a linear increase, but you'll see the amount available for depletion in the Middle Rio Grande, that's the blue amount, that gets capped out a little past 1 million acre feet of inflow at ODOE. So, 1.1, 1.2 million acre feet of inflows. New Mexico can only take about 400,000 acre feet of that, and all remaining flow goes on to Elephant Butte. At least that's the theory. In practice, of course, there's going to be some evaporation of that water. So we have real challenges just in the way that the compact is structured in terms of making those annual obligations. And we don't have, there's not a whole lot of fat to trim. We're even in the high supply years, we're really tightly constrained, and we can never really use more than that available for depletion in Middle Rio Grande blue bar under any circumstances. So if we could then just go right back to I believe it is slide 9. What we want to do, I'm not going to sort of lay out, I don't know, Texas's roadmap litigation strategy for what they think what they could get from us if we go past that red line. I'll let them figure that out for themselves. But suffice to say, New Mexico would have very little control over managing its water, and there would likely be very severe and draconian water cuts to all users, is my guess as to what would happen. We want to avoid that. We also just want to have everybody be able to continue to use water in a sustainable way. And so what we're trying to do is get the major water users in New Mexico to curtail. If we have to use a stick, we will, but we'd rather use carrots. The one stick we have is priority administration. And what that would entail is we would sort out what we believe to be the most junior users, and we would curtail them to the maximum extent we could. And then we would go to the next most junior users, curtail them, then curtail the following until there was enough water to deliver the water to the Elephant Butte for the compact. That's going to lead to some, again, pretty draconian and severe results. It would likely lead to a lot of municipal entities with almost no water. It would lead to a number of farmers with no water, and this would all be uncompensated curtailment. So you would not get anything for having your water taken away. It would just be the state would be telling you that water is going to Elephant Butte. And so, as I say here on slide 9, priority administration is harsh. We do it. I mean, it's not like we won't do it if we have to. We do it primarily every year on some smaller stream systems. The Cimarron river system in northeast New Mexico. A lot of you probably don't think about it very much. Most years we are administering by priority on that river system, but those are primarily all surface water users. They understand the game. We have a water master who does it, and they've adjusted their affairs to expect it. We are not ready for widespread priority administration in the Middle Rio Grande, and doing so would be a really again, harsh, challenging setup. There's various ways you can avoid this. So one of those ways is we could just go buy up some of the water rights, or some other entities with lots of assets go buy up some of the water rights. And this would be maybe a more of a carrot approach if we were buying the water rights from willing sellers. That's probably going to be part of the solution. We've done that on the Pecos River. We've been accused of buying up too many water rights on the Pecos River. There are some externalities with permanent purchases of water rights. Certain communities, once you drop below a sort of minimum threshold number of farms in the area, they won't have enough, people to sustain those communities. There's also land management issues. In the Lower Rio Grande, we're looking right now, we have to reduce our depletions there. The solution is probably going to include the permanent purchase of water rights, but we want to do it in a thoughtful way that's going to maximize the benefit to the water users and minimize the externalities. That's not going to alone get us to where we need to be, just buyouts of water rights. It's not going to reduce municipal uses really at all, and there's not enough other water rights with willing sellers likely to be able to get us where we need to be. And it has a very real perception of falling unequally solely on agricultural users who are usually more willing to sell their water rights than municipalities. So that's part of the solution, but it's not going to be the solution alone. We're looking really hard at infrastructure improvements and bringing in additional supplies. That's not the subject of this talk, but those are really important issues. And there's a lot of thoughtful debate to be had about them. Those will help, but infrastructure. One of the things when we saw the graph in the 1950s with us climbing out of a deep trough, we built something that's kind of a bad word now in some environmental communities. It's called the low flow conveyance channel. It was just redigging a canal below Socorro all the way to Elephant Butte that more efficiently got water to Elephant Butte. It wasn't done with a whole lot of sort of environmental considerations in mind, and it certainly hasn't been maintained in an effective way. And now it's actually causing a net drain on the system. But putting some smart investment into using that at the correct times to get some pulses of water to Elephant Butte, while then maintaining it in a way that remaining flows would stay in the Rio Grande to actually improve habitat in the Rio Grande, we do think pretty strongly is part of the solution. But again, that's something that a lot of communities have concerns about because they don't want to see what we did in the 1950s. And of course, we don't want that either. But that's an infrastructure solution. Again, it's not going to be the only one. And then bringing additional supplies, the governor's strategic water supply initiative to look at treating brackish water. That's like, we're hopeful that can bring some additional supply, but that's going to be a very expensive additional supply, and that's certainly not going to be the entirety of the Middle Rio Grande's sort of water debit. That's likely to be the most expensive water in the system, and we'd like to be able to develop that so we can continue to grow and bring innovative industries. But that's again not going to solve everything. And again, those topics are worthy of their own entire presentations. I'm not going to talk any more about them now. The big thing that we can do that's actually, cost effective for all water users that I really wanted to focus on as a carrot is the thing we have in bold here, and that's negotiated watershed sharing agreements. Bringing water users together so that we can have, if we have a hydrologic scenario that requires less water use and more water being shepherded to Elephant Butte, that we have negotiated reductions. When we do that, we can water users can plan for their use. Municipalities can communicate with their users about what they need to do and what types of watering restrictions they might be in. Farmers can plan in advance based on sort of water supply projections. It works. We have this in place in a number of parts of the state, albeit they're smaller parts of the state. We have a pretty advanced set of proposals that parties have discussed in the Lower Rio Grande. It's not something, though, that we've really started talking about in the Middle Rio Grande. And that's really what we're here today to say is the big thing we want to spur and we've been, communicating already with the major water users. We want to have agreed plans on voluntary water use reduction under certain hydrologic conditions to get water to Elephant Butte. These don't have to be in total derogation of priorities. The shortage sharing agreements that we have in other parts of the state recognize and protect priorities. They just do it in a more blended way that is not quite as harsh as priority administration. So on the Rio Chama, we have a shortage sharing agreement. On the Pecos, we have sort of effectively a shortage sharing agreement. On the Lower Pecos, we have one on the Jemez River. And in all these places, the senior users get the most water, but they may have some amount of water that they cut back on, and the juniors cut back on more. And again, if this is negotiated in advance and all the parties are understanding what their obligations are when the hydrologic projections are coming out, they're able to plan their affairs and not have stranded investments that they can't make up. So we're just now at the beginning of the discussion with the major water users in the Middle Rio Grande about how we can have negotiated planned water deliveries to Elephant Butte. And that's really, the stick that we have is priority administration. As I tried to illustrate before, that's going to hit everybody eventually in a kind of a blunderbuss way. And it's going to engender litigation. Negotiated shortage sharing agreements provide more certainty to parties. They're less costly, and they're to my mind the most effective solution we have. We have to do all of these things. It's an all of the above type of problem we have. But the one that we really have, and I know Norm Gom has been beating this drum for many years. The one that we haven't been talking about enough is get parties to commit to usage reductions in advance so that we can make water deliveries. And that is something that we're serious about. So the last point I'd say is we can only bring people to the table and commit to doing that if they think it's in their interest. And that's if they think that we or somebody else will enforce priorities in a way that's going to be more harmful for them in the alternative. And I think showing how our trajectory may be going towards a compact violation with the state engineer being able to curtail every single user, including the most senior, in order to comply with compacts, is we hope inducement to water users to be serious about coming together and talking about shortage sharing agreements. I do think the ones we've talked to are serious. They want to come. They want to roll up their sleeves. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District is the biggest water user in the Middle Rio Grande. They serve users with a number of different priorities. So the way that priority administration would hit them would cause chaos in their operations. And they, I think, have come a really long way in the last 30 to 40 years from being an entity that a lot of people didn't see as a useful partner in reaching kind of compact and environmental goals to having a management team now that really does actually measure and track their diversions in a useful way, so that once we have measurement of their diversions, we can effectively move the levers to figure out how much water needs to get to Elephant Butte. And of course, they have members who are farmers who rely on the water. We're not going to require MRGCD to take it all out of themselves, but there are, by all accounts, their board, their leadership, their members are more than interested in doing their part to try and solve this, because again, the alternative is going to fall really heavily on them. And the same with the other large users. They haven't been asked in the past to sort of contribute to compact deliveries. It's kind of new terrain for them. With one caveat, the other big thing that we did back in the 1950s to dig out of our trough, besides building the low flow conveyance channel, was the state engineer went to the big municipal users and really went out on a legal limb and said, any more water you pump out of the ground, you need to find offsets to offset effects on the Rio Grande. That was not written in law anywhere at the time the state engineer ordered that, but he saw that groundwater pumping was going to be depleting the Rio Grande just as surely as surface diversions would. He was challenged in court on that, and the courts backed him up. And I mean, he stood down the most powerful commercial interests in the state in order to ensure that their impacts on the river would not be any greater than they were at that moment. And if the state engineer hadn't gone out and taken that step in the 50s, I don't think we would have climbed out of that hole, even with the low flow conveyance channel, even with anything else happening. So in order to, meet our compact obligations, we have asked municipalities to do their part in the past. And I think that, the leadership that we've talked to in recent years, just in general, about these issues is ready to come together on this. We just haven't started that conversation. There hasn't been the space to do that yet. And so that's likely to be happening coming up. And we're also doing this against a backdrop of the 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos wanting their water rights to be quantified and recognized. And the state, that's long overdue. The state's ready to do that. When I said the most seniors could be curtailed for compact purposes, I'm not sure that pueblos actually could be. Their water rights are protected by federal law, which, that supremacy issue has never been tested, and that's not something we're interested in testing. I think the pueblos, historically irrigated acreage would be something that we'd be seeking to protect. But other than that, it's there's a lot of long overdue business to be done in terms of managing water in the Middle Rio Grande, and we think it's a good environment in terms of willing partners to do that. So that concludes my prepared comments. Tanya, I think wanted to kind of wrap things up in terms of what our message is, and then we're happy to take questions.
Sounds great. Well, help me clap for Nat. Thank you very much for the overview. And I think the main point of the discussion is to provide information. And we have a strong commitment to having open communication and open discussions with water users throughout the state. This discussion is focused on our Middle Rio Grande issues and our Rio Grande Basin issues, but we're thinking about this on a statewide basis. And I want to come back and just confirm that based on the input from our scientists and the predictions that we have heard and the advice we've received, the governor did put out in January a 50-year water action plan that spans a multitude of actions and priorities that are happening in the state. We targeted 11 specific actions in 3 different categories. Those include water conservation, and that is in all sectors, so municipal sectors and agricultural sectors, and acknowledging that we're going to have to think about how to operate the system in an efficient way and in an innovative way. So that's on our mind as we're having this discussion today. We're also going to be looking at new water supplies, and that's primarily a New Mexico Environment Department initiative. They're in the process of gathering information and trying to think about the feasibility of some of these new programs. And then the third major bucket is protection of water quality and watershed health. And as we know, that the water that we do have, we need to take very good care of it and make sure that it is available for human consumption and for growing the crops that our farmers are growing. And of course, the natural environment. So all of those issues are wrapped together. This discussion amplifies, again, that we're working on a lot of things at the same time. We're talking about the importance of water data across all of our areas, the importance of water planning. And I want to just quickly double down and amplify the requests that everyone participate in the upcoming regional water planning workshops that are going to be happening, especially in the Middle Rio Grande, and participate online as well. So we're happy to be here. Thank you again, Nat, for providing good information. And this, of course, is not the only opportunity for us to be out in the communities and to be able to receive input. We're committed to that and really look forward to continuing the trajectory that we're on of sound water management throughout the state. So thank you. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions, and then we'll be available into the future as well.
Thank you so much. I really got a lot out of all of the data that you presented, and we do have some questions. So the first question is coming from Jennifer Yachtin. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. How much is the push for shortage agreements and related action tied to the recent Supreme Court rejection of the Rio Grande settlement in the Lower Rio Grande? Is there, oh, sorry, go ahead, and then I'll do the second part.
Oh, sorry. Well, you can do the whole question.
Is there more urgency now to address going above that 2,000 AFY limit because of that rejection?
I'm really glad, Jennifer. Thank you for the question, because it gives us an opportunity to clarify. So the Supreme Court case with Texas right now is entirely about what's happening below Elephant Butte. As I said, the compact is actually silent about how the water gets divided below Elephant Butte, and there's historical reasons for that, but I'm not going to go into them now. The point now is we don't agree on them, and we need to get that figured out. New Mexico and Texas actually reached an agreement there about how to divide the water between the states, but the United States, through the Bureau of Reclamation, had been operating the Rio Grande project, which distributed irrigation water between the states, and they were working in conjunction with irrigation districts in New Mexico and Texas. The irrigation districts have their views about how the water needs to be delivered and how water in New Mexico should be administered, so that those irrigation districts are not unfairly harmed by whatever division the states have. And the United States is sort of presenting a claim in the Supreme Court in that regard. The Supreme Court's rejection basically said nothing about the merits of the disputes, only that the states of New Mexico and Texas could not settle their claims while leaving the United States claim sort of on behalf of the districts unresolved. And so it didn't say that claim, had merit. It didn't say it didn't have merit. It just said you can't just leave them hanging with your settlement. That is unrelated to the 200,000 red line. So that is the 200,000 red line is a separate obligation of New Mexico in terms of deliveries from above Elephant Butte to Elephant Butte. The Supreme Court case, that we have going with Texas right now, is in terms of what gets released out of Elephant Butte, how much water is going to New Mexico farmers, whether other users in New Mexico are interfering with the irrigation district operations in New Mexico, and how much water is going to Texas. Those issues are the same issues regardless of whether New Mexico is above or below that 200,000 acre-foot red line. It would effectively be another claim Texas could have against New Mexico if we went below that red line. It would be a new Supreme Court case. We don't want that, obviously, but it's not related to the Supreme Court case we currently have.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Jean Logston had a question. Does the Rio Grande Compact only apply to surface water? If so, could users substitute using their surface water by digging underground wells? And what would that look like?
So thank you for that question as well. So the Rio Grande Compact's compliance is measured by the flow of surface water. But the Middle Rio Grande has a very large alluvial aquifer, which means an aquifer that is in hydrologic connection with the surface flows. So for nearly every user who has the wherewithal to drill a well, the water that they would be withdrawing would have effects on the surface flows. And so the answer is basically no. We cannot just drill our way out of this problem. There are some areas where you can go down to deeper aquifers that have confining layers that won't allow that, that won't be depleting the alluvial aquifer, but that water is not super high quality, and so would need to be treated. And that's really where we're looking at with the strategic water supply, is providing market incentives for treatment of that water. But even with state support, that's expensive technology, and we can't just drill our way out of this problem just drilling into those deep brackish aquifers. That's probably part of the solution, particularly for cutting edge, commercial uses of water that where you can pay a lot for water, but it's not going to provide more irrigation water. And that's why, we do regulate wells in the regular alluvial aquifer to prevent them from having any additional impacts on surface flows. So thanks for the question.
Thanks. Another quick question just on that 200 AFY, 200,000 AFY limit. Do you think there's a possibility that we will breach that this year or next year?
I'm not a meteorologist or a hydrologist. I don't make those predictions. We really don't know until we see the data, but it's been pretty rare as you looked at the historical record for us in any year to have a debit of more than 50,000 acre feet in 1 year. And so, I think it would be unlikely, but again, it's, we are getting a nice little monsoon pattern right now. Monsoon rains in the Albuquerque area and in the Jemez Mountains really help, because that's water that enters the system below that ODE gauge. And so if those things flow to Elephant Butte, great. Unfortunately, those things also bring a lot of sediment into the system, and they can dump that sediment right at the mouth of Elephant Butte and actually, reduce the efficiency of the system. So it's complicated. And I don't think, we're expecting us to go past the 200,000 line this year, but we can't say with certainty.
And I'll just add in the ideas that we're thinking about and the discussions that we want to undertake are things we want to do, even if we're not going to be crossing that line next year or this year. So there are things that we think we need to start now and really want to engage with a lot of the constituencies and water users at this time.
Thank you. That was a really good addition. I think it's critical for us all to realize that even if it's not this year, we're still in a crisis and we still have to do everything in our power to manage that water. We had some great questions on the shortage sharing agreements. And so Ryan Maggi asked, are hypothetical shortage sharing agreements limited to agricultural users and districts, or is it anticipated that municipalities and other users, excluding tribes, would be included in those agreements? Are they publicly available? Does the state have a model that they base those on? What do those negotiations look like?
Thank you. Another great question. So any shortage sharing agreement that gets entered into is a public document, and those are for sure available. Every basin is pretty different in terms of the relative priorities of users, so it's hard to say that there's a fixed model that works. But we would anticipate that any shortage sharing agreement in the Middle Rio Grande not solely be agricultural users, that it would include some municipal curtailment. There's a fair amount of hard demand in municipalities, but there's also some flexibility. And, we've seen, unfortunately, with recent rains causing flooding in the city of Las Vegas's water system, where they've had to take some pretty drastic water conservation measures there. People have done it. They've pitched in and they've really cut back the city of Las Vegas's water use quite a bit. This is Las Vegas, New Mexico. It's taking them to zero. I mean, you start having some real human health and safety issues, but we think that all users, all major users should pitch in. I think it's going to, provide a much better path towards kind of a shared common destiny that we have, that everybody's pitching in. Again, in terms of a template, we have a few different ones from different areas. It'll look a lot different here than it has anywhere else. And again, we've started reaching out. We haven't finished reaching out, to communicating with these major water users, but that'll be happening over coming months. And there's various forums in which we can have these discussions. I don't want to say for sure right now exactly what those will look like, because I want to hear from those users about where they feel most comfortable having those conversations. But again, I think there's widespread understanding that we all want certainty about what our plan is to reduce depletions if we need to.
Thank you. And then just to follow on to that, you did mention that, when water is curtailed by priority administration, there's no compensation for that curtailment. But in shortage sharing agreements, are there negotiated compensations as part of those agreements?
So there's different ways this can happen. In the San Luis Valley of Colorado, I mentioned that a little bit. There is compensated. So if people are out of priority but want to pump, they pay money, and other people are compensated not to pump. That's a shortage sharing agreement where there's some compensation for some users from other users. There's sometimes compensation in water. So on the Pecos River, it's a complicated system we have between groundwater users in the Roswell area and more senior surface water users in the Carlsbad area. But under certain hydrologic scenarios, the users in Carlsbad have to deliver water to Texas. Under other hydrologic circumstances, groundwater is pumped from the Roswell Artesian Basin and delivered to the Carlsbad users in exchange for the Carlsbad users not calling priority on the Roswell users. So it's a complicated system, but yes, there can be compensation of some sort in shortage sharing agreements. It really depends on the scenario whether it makes sense.
And I'll just jump in and add, one of the priorities that we're trying to emphasize right now is how can we take advantage of the funding that is available through multiple federal agencies and multiple sources to try to incentivize more water conservation and tune up our water management strategies. And so that's one of our priorities. And I think it can be utilized in conjunction with some of these creative water use agreements.
Thank you. Does the state engineer have the enforcement authority to enforce those priority administrations in the Middle Rio Grande right now? And the ability, do you have the staffing and what you need to do that?
So it's another good question. I think that it depends on what we need to enforce too. So I've told a lot of folks, the Middle Rio Grande actually in some senses is easier to do priority enforcement on than other places because so many of there's not that many points of diversion. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District has four points of diversion. And then there's, some major municipal users. Still, we're not staffed, we don't have an army of water masters out there to go out and check everything in MRGCD to make sure that they're not taking more water than they're entitled to, or all the well users. I think if we need to, we can make it work by pulling some resources from other areas, but we don't right now have the staffing to just sort of casually have that district office go out and do a full priority call. Again, if we need to, we do have a number of folks we could pull into it and do it. And we will be likely looking for some staffing increases related to these issues in the upcoming session. But yeah, we don't have the staff we'd like to be able to pull it off, but we'll do what we need to do.
Great. Do you have an idea of what % reduction those shortage sharings would need to address to get us into a better position?
I don't have numbers right now. No. We have a lot of hydrologists looking at this, and I don't want to put some numbers out there at this moment, but so that's sorry.
No, that's fine. I think it's a really good and interesting piece of data that we need to get our hands around. And part of that is getting the Water Data Initiative Act funded appropriately, getting you more staff funded. So I'm going to put in a plug for everyone, contact your legislators, ask for money for the state engineer's office for funding in this coming session so that we can get the people we need to do those calculations to know where we're at and how we stand and what we need to get to. Okay, I have another.
I'll just amplify that, Brittany. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think one of the goals we should have is to have agreements that can be flexible and be ramped up or ramped down depending on the hydrologic conditions that we do see. So if we have some tools available, if we have some options available, that helps us avoid being in a crisis situation where we might have to be thinking about what are the state's hammers? What are the state's obligations? How are we going to deal with the fact that we don't have these tools available? That's not the scenario that we want to be in. We would rather be working collaboratively with water users about what some of our future options may look like.
Thank you. That's a very helpful addition. We have a question about what is the priority of domestic wells, and I'm assuming this person means a 7212-1 well, and how will those get curtailed? And will you consider if that person also has a municipal supply on top of their domestic well?
Yeah, thanks. This is a pretty in the weeds question, and I don't know that I'd assume what you assumed about the question. So domestic wells, just for so we're all on the same page, are wells that serve as usually a single household or a small number of households for their domestic uses. And for a long time, those were people could just drill those. They didn't need a permit or anything. And if later on they wanted to declare that water right to the state engineer's office, we would say, okay, you can pump up to 3 acre-feet per year out of those. And then in recent decades, we have more recent statutes and regulations. There's a statute that governs these. It's 7212-1.1 of the water code, and that specifies the circumstances under which people can obtain these permits. And there's also a set of regulations associated with that. But the permit, the statute and the regulations about the statute sort of create what I think of as a slightly different water right than if somebody would drilled a domestic well 70 years ago. What they drill today is a lot, I think it's a much more constrained water right than the old ones. The answer is to the question, would we include those? I don't have the answer to that yet. Under a prior state engineer, he was actually deposed under oath when his regulations were being challenged on domestic wells. And somebody said, will you ever do a priority call on domestic wells? And he said something to the effect of, well, I'll always allow people to use water for indoor uses only, because that would be that would be an issue of human health and safety if we left those people entirely without water. And that seems like a pretty, reasonable point. The reason I say that in some specificity is because that wound up in a published appellate decision. So it's sort of like it's out there in the record what the state engineer thought about curtailing domestic wells in the event of priority calls. The question that we'll be looking at is, how much water are we likely to get out of the domestic wells versus the effort in sort of enforcing domestic well curtailment. And there's a lot of concern. I know that there's a lot of folks with domestic wells plus a municipal hookup, and they might be using that domestic well for some irrigation purposes in the Middle Rio Grande. I don't know. When we've studied that issue in other basins, it's turned out that the impact of domestic wells on those basins was a lot less than feared. So when we were allowing people the right to use 3 acre-feet per year out of every domestic well, where we've actually studied it, it's on average less than half an acre-foot per domestic well. So if that's all people are actually getting out of domestic wells, is that where our resources are going to be best deployed? We have more study to do to get a better handle on what's actually being pumped out of domestic wells in order to ensure that that's the most effective way for us to enforce by priority. It's certainly domestic well owners shouldn't just assume they're off the hook here. That's particularly if they have a municipal supply, they're under a prior administration system. But are we going to put those at the top of the list to make sure that they're in compliance with a priority call? That we have to analyze how much water we're going to get out of that versus administering in another part of the system.
Thank you. Is the OSE working on messaging with the other big water users in the Middle Rio Grande around conservation? For example, the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority is only showing drought stage 1. And does that give urban water users the wrong idea about where we are in this crisis?
Thanks. I don't think that. I think that Albuquerque Bernalillo Water Utility Authority has been very good at getting water users in Albuquerque to take water conservation seriously. When I went to law school, which wasn't that long ago, I think the average water use was something like 50% higher in terms of gallons per capita per day than it is now. So I wouldn't say that their drought, what drought level they're in right now is indicative of sort of them not adequately messaging. We will be messaging, communicating with the utility authority and other major municipal providers about jointly coming up with a strategy to make sure that we have the conservation we need to based on the situation we're in. But I don't think right now that's I'd agree that just in drought stage 1 they're kind of asleep at the switch.
Thank you. We have another question about the shortage sharing agreements. Can you give some generalized examples of what sort of sticking points there usually are in negotiating those shortage sharing over agreements and how those typically are overcome? Do parties tend to start really far apart, or is everyone who comes to the table, there for the right reasons and they understand that they are in this because they don't want to get cut off by priority?
Thanks. Yeah, no, so I wasn't in the PECOS negotiations. Norm was, and I don't want to put him on the spot, but I'm curious where the parties started when those negotiations began in earnest. But I would say that in the negotiations I'm in, and those include the Lower Rio Grande, the parties actually haven't been that far apart in terms of understanding the magnitude of the issue. What they don't want, what has been weirdly a bigger sticking point, is agreeing on trigger points for what data point is going to tell me that I now have to curtail, and is that going to be clear? Is that a fair data point? Is it an objective data point? And that seems like it shouldn't be that hard of a point to kind of get agreement on. But weirdly, that one is held up, and this is from very small acequia disputes involving tens of acre feet to something that's much bigger, and that just I think reflects there's some trust issues that you don't want to take the other side's word for it, that you need to curtail. We want an independent, objective measure of that, and you have to come up with those things pretty creatively. But honestly, when we actually have had these conversations with water users that I've seen, they've understood the problem, and that's been some common ground with them, at least in my experience. I don't think it's probably a universal truth, but that's what I've seen.
And I'll just throw out, and Nat kind of highlighted this, is you might have different agreements based on the circumstances at a particular location. So in the Clovis Portales area, that environment might give rise to a certain type of agreement that's going to look different than something in the Lower Rio Grande or in northern New Mexico. So trying to keep an open mind about what kinds of tools we could bring to the table to help neighbors share a limited resource is what we would be looking for.
Thank you. Is the state planning on any sort of infrastructure improvements other than the rehabilitation of the low flow conveyance channel to improve the Middle Rio Grande compliance with the compact?
So the answer is yes. And we're constantly looking at how to improve sort of water delivery and frankly do it in a more environmentally responsible way. So there's every year the Interstate Stream Commission spends over $1 million clearing a sediment blockage right at the mouth of Elephant Butte Reservoir. So that's not the low flow conveyance channel. That's I consider that infrastructure work. I mean, they're maintaining that infrastructure. The Rio Grande, is highly engineered. It's a lot of us, and I consider myself an environmentalist. I mean, we like the idea of a free flowing river. That's not the reality of the Rio Grande we have, and it's not a Rio Grande. It's never going to be completely free flowing if we want to have human communities that aren't flooded every year along its banks. It wants to flood, it wants to move, it wants to do all sorts of things. It could care less about getting to Elephant Butte. And if New Mexico, needs to still comply with this compact and wants to have agriculture and wants to have people living in downtown Albuquerque, we need to engineer it. And that's an ongoing issue all up and down the river. It's not just the low flow conveyance channel. That's a big project. It's a big project that a lot of people have a lot of interest in, but it's far from the only ongoing infrastructure need that we have. There's constantly attention on the infrastructure within MRGCD to make sure that within their system, the water is being delivered efficiently and we don't have unneeded losses there. So no, the low flow conveyance channel is not the only infrastructure project that we're looking at.
And I'll just throw out a few other examples. We know we have critical issues right now with El Vado and the federal work that's necessary to rehabilitate that structure. All of our systems are connected. We want to make sure that the conveyances are operational and when working properly and efficiently. So we're thinking about that. Our teams have been engaged with crews from the Bureau of Reclamation as we speak up in the Chama River Basin to try to make sure that that river is flowing. We have to be careful because of the overbanking and the flooding implications up there. But throughout the state, we're thinking about these tools and thinking about how to work with partners in the particular locations to make sure we can meet the water needs.
Thank you so much. You answered so many wonderful questions for us tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all of this in so much detail and give us such a fabulous set of data with these slides. We'll be posting your slides on our website along with the recording of the website. If anyone has any follow-up questions, you can always send them to us and we will get them answered for you. I believe Norm wanted to chime in on the PECOS agreement and how that went. I think we have just a moment for him to do that, and then we'll have some closing slides with some action items that we would love for you all to take.
Hey, everybody. That was a marvelous presentation. I want to thank Nat and Tanya so much. It was really good. I think the PECOS does offer an instructive example, and I just want to briefly tell you what my experience was there. The Supreme Court had ordered in an amended decree that we never owe water again to the state of Texas. And that was a severe problem for 10 years following that decree. I became Interstate Stream Commission Director in 1997. I believe the decree was 87. When push came to shove and it was clear we were going to violate the decree because we couldn't get water through the last dam in New Mexico, we decided that we were going to make a priority call on all the uses in the basin. And we were going to do it long enough to get enough water through that dam, or reclamation was going to have to prevent water from going through the dam. And in that case, it would be on them, not on the state. And I guess the threat was credible enough because we got people to the table. We got quite a few people to the table, all of the big water users. I think we had about 40 participants. We first agreed on the facts. What are the facts? What are the flows? What do we know? What's the science? And the Interstate Stream Commission had an excellent modeler and models. And after we agreed on the facts, the users themselves came up with the agreement. They developed the agreement. They determined the ratios between Carlsbad and Roswell and the trigger points and all of that because they understood. The Water Security Planning Act says that we're going to develop plans to live within our means. And the only way to do that is to first agree on the facts. First agree on the challenges and then decide how to solve it. It's a problem and a solution. And you have to get people to the table, and the way to do that is by convincing them that the alternative to coming to the table is worse. And thank you, Matt and Tanya.
Thank you, Norm.
So you're back on camera, at least briefly.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say thanks for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. Thanks especially to Nat for putting together the presentation, and again, confirming that the team at the Interstate Stream Commission and the State Engineer Office is working every day on these issues. So thanks for having us, and look forward to additional discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we've got some action items for you guys. I'm going to just pull up the next set of slides here. So OSE, ISE action items. We have some fabulous planning open houses that the ISE has been hosting. There's several more sessions. The Middle Rio Grande session in Albuquerque is going to be in August. I am going to post in the chat the link to mainstreamnewmexico.org, and you can find all of the dates for the open houses there. You can also take their online survey, which is kind of an online format of that open house. But I did have a little birdie tell me that if you go in person, you might get a water bottle, a Nalgene. So it might be worth your time to go, mingle and network and find your water people there. And also, if you, one thing that I personally love is I love to read dystopias, and I love to read dystopias because I love to read about communities that come together and solve hard problems and overcome crisis. And I have such hope and faith in this water community that this is a crisis that we can overcome, that we are going to come out of this better than we ever were before, that we're going to work together to find a path forward that is going to be sustainable for the future of our children, our grandchildren, for our environment, for our industries. We're going to have a thriving New Mexico. And I think one way that I would really love to have your help in starting that process is, if you're a water owner or you're part of a water community, engage with your community members and talk about shortage sharing agreements, talk about voluntarily conserving water in times of shortage. This could, if you don't feel like you're part of a community where you have anything to contribute in terms of that shortage sharing agreement, reach out to your municipality. Tell them that this is something that's important to you and that you want them to engage in these negotiations to find these agreements to move forward. If you're an irrigator, can you reduce your irrigation? Can you reduce your indoor water use? Flush your toilet a tiny bit less. Every gallon is going to count. And I know that we can all work together to find a path forward to make sure that we're going to meet the compact in a way that's going to work for us in the long term. As we heard, the science is kind of scary, honestly, but it also provides us with this fabulous opportunity to do what New Mexicans are best at. We're scrappy, we're determined, and we can really make something beneficial out of this, just like we've made so many beneficial things out of our state throughout history. So please, talk to your water constituents, constituents the wrong word, talk to your water friends, talk to your water community, get them on board with the shortage sharing. I know it is hard to hear that we're going to have to be cut off or that we're going to have to reduce. But if we all do it together, the burden is much less when it's shared. So go to those open houses, talk to your people. And then the Water Advocates has a special request also. Norm is going to chime in on this, but we need 15 volunteers to make thoughtful public comment about stopping fracking water reuse that isn't based on science. This will be public comments in front of the Water Quality Control Commission hearing. Sorry, I was a little fumbly with my words there. The Water Quality Control Commission hearing. The commission reconvenes August 5th and will probably go for a week or maybe longer, and they will be taking public comment during that time. If you're interested in making public comment, you can email Norm. His email is on screen and I'll put it in the chat as well. Norm, did you want to say just a brief word about that also?
Well, what I want to say is that it would be really great if we could use fracking wastewater for water supply. But it's unquestionable that the science is not there. The researchers literally don't have a single point in their database for NED, the Environment Department that drafted the rules, to be able to base scientific standards and permits on. So no science, no reuse outside the oil field is the position that the water advocates is taking. We need 15 people who will make thoughtful public comment about why the rush to use this uncharacterized, extremely toxic waste needs to wait on the science. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to quickly go over our schedule of events for our next third Thursday workshops. August 15th, we're going to have our part 2 from Bruce Thompson. He's going to be talking about New Mexico's water resources. If you remember from May, he gave a presentation on unconventional water resources and their sustainability or unsustainability. So we really hope you'll join us for part 2 with Bruce. I'm going to drop the registration link for that meeting into the chat. So go ahead and register tonight so you don't forget. We'll also be sending out our flyers by email as normal. September 19th, we've got a fabulous aridification panel, and please forgive me, I forgot to update the slide. We actually do have our panelists lined up. They're from New Mexico Tech, and it's going to be fabulous. And October 17th, we have the Aquifer Research and Monitoring Program and implementation of the Water Data Act by Stacey Timmons. As I mentioned before, this is something that we really want your help with in lobbying your legislators, telling them that this is important to fund. This is something that we really want to get behind. Without the data, we really don't have the foundation that we need for good management. So please come to that to learn more about those 2 programs and how we can work together to get some funding into those programs. And then November 21st is going to be our legislative priorities and how you can help us during the legislature to get all of these good water management policies funded, get staffing for the state engineer, get staffing for ISC, get staffing for the New Mexico Tech and the programs that they're implementing. There's lots of places where we need funding for water management and policy, and there's a big bubble of money that's available. And so we really want to make sure that our legislators know where we want that money to go. So come on 21st to get some ideas of what that looks like. We are grateful to our sponsors, Amigos Bravos, the League of Women Voters of New Mexico, 350 New Mexico, Interfaith Power and Light, and New Mexico Wild. We couldn't do it without all of you. Thank you so much. And then if you want to volunteer with us, we are always looking for volunteers. We're currently looking for someone to help us with our newsletter production. If that's something that interests you, please contact Norm or myself. And if you don't want to volunteer, but you have some extra cash laying around, you can always donate to our process, and it helps us continue to put these educational resources forward for you. And I've put a donation link in the chat for you. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We know you are all busy, and to take time out of your schedules to hear about these really critical items and New Mexico's water crisis and what we can do about it. That forming this community is just, it really warms my heart to see all of you here tonight. So thank you for coming. Tanya and Nat, thank you so much for taking time out of your really busy schedules to provide us with this fabulous presentation. As always, we will be posting the presentation on our website. Give me a couple days to get that up, and then you can go and see the slides and the recording so that you can refresh yourself if you missed a piece tonight. Thank you so much.
And I might just add in closing that I've gotten requests from several legislators to forward the recording to them. they thought they would be busy tonight.
Thank you for everyone's support.
Have a good evening.